Hello and welcome to another episode of Leaders of Transformation. Today we're going to talk about playing to your strengths, what that means personally for you and how that applies in your business. We have a great guest here who I had the opportunity to meet in person when I was in Sacramento. We met on LinkedIn and I suggested that we have coffee and we did, and it was amazing. And I was like, you have to be on the show sharing what you're doing. So Darren Virassammy is the co-founder and chief operating officer of 34 Strong, which believes that everyone deserves a great place to work and any workplace can be great. And so we're going to talk about that, practically speaking, how they do that. They work in smaller companies, but they also work in very large organizations. In fact, being in Sacramento, they work also with the government. So they have had tons of experience applying the strengths and Strengths Finder, if you're familiar with the Strengths Finder model, into companies. So Darren, welcome to Leaders of Transformation. We're excited that you're here today.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Truly a pleasure to be here. I can't wait to have our conversation.
Yes. And, there's a lot we can talk about here, but to start off with, just to get our listeners kind of on the same page in terms of Strengths Finder, what it means, how it works. Your company is called 34 Strong. Let's talk about why you called your company that name, why you chose that.
Sure. So we actually just were founded about 6 years ago, just over 6 years ago. So, school's starting at this time of year and stuff. So we're now first graders effectively, right? So the name of the company comes from at the time we were starting it, we were doing a lot of focused work around the Strengths Finder assessment and really diving into individuals' natural talents or natural patterns of thought, feelings, and behaviors that could be productively applied. And this stemmed from the Clifton Strengths movement, and Dr. Donald Clifton's question that he asked many, many decades ago was simply, what'll happen when we focus on what's right with people instead of fixating on what's wrong with them? So in his years of research, he spent years trying to dig into answering that question, studied millions of people to identify people's natural talents. And talent is defined as our natural patterns of thought, feelings, and behaviors that can be productively applied. In his work, Nicole, what ended up coming out is there's these 34 patterns, these 34 buckets of talents that exist in all humans in a ranked order from 1 through 34. Now, here's the thing. There's not the good talents and the bad talents, and I've got the good ones, you've got the bad ones and all that, even though, we might think like that, oh gosh, I wish I had this person's talents. But out of those 34 in that ranked order, all of those talents are created equal. They all do different things, and they are all a unique way for us to shine, to really be our best version of ourselves, and to really contribute to the teams that we're on, to the families that we're in, the organizations that we're a part of, and the connections that we're making in the world at large. So the name 34 Strong comes from the fact that all 34 strengths are created equal. And one final caveat to that, the likelihood of somebody having their top 10 of those 34 in the same order as you is something like 1 in 6 billion. So your results are highly unique to you from the lens of how your talents will show up for you to contribute and in certain needs that you might have along the way.
Got it. Well, and so first of all, what are your 5, or I don't know, you've got your top 5 or 10 memorized, I don't know.
Yeah, so I've got achiever, arranger, relator, learner, responsibility. Those are my top 5. 6 is focus, 7 is self-assurance, 8 is discipline, 9 is significance, and 10 is futuristic. Fascinating part about that, without geeking out too much on results, because everybody might not have knowledge of that, 4 of my top 10 are 4 of the most frequently recurring talents in people. So if we were to take just the United States at large, and we were to rank the United States from 1 through 34, 4 of my top 10 are 4 of the most regularly recurring talents in the top 10. I also have 4 of my top 10 that are in the bottom 5 least frequently recurring talents in people across the board. So that's just a little unique fact. I'm still working to figure out what that means, but we're all our own versions of unicorns in some way, right?
Yes.
So that's the whole point.
To a lot of people. There you go.
What's that?
Means you can relate to a lot of people.
I suppose so. That's what I aim for.
One
So
way. You know what? They say, if you're going to make up a story, we all live by our own story, right? So if you're going to make up a
you
story,
got it.
make it a good
Absolutely.
one.
Absolutely. Power of stories is incredible.
Yeah. Now, and you are very relatable. And that's what I liked about you when we were meeting and talking, and I got to meet your partner and the launch of his book, Playing to Their Strengths, which is now applying to this information to their families and so forth.
Yeah.
You were great. So let's talk about the importance of focusing on strengths. Why is that important? Schools don't do it oftentimes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know that my report card, one of my first early on, I remember my first report cards, grade 1, grade 2, they're like, yeah, she's A's in all these other areas, but her handwriting is horrible. And I'm like, really? We're going to talk about my handwriting? Why don't we talk about the fact that I'm getting good grades over here? They want to focus on those weaknesses, or math is an area, she's got to work on her math because she's not as good in that area. And we're taught that in school. And yet here it's, you're focusing on strengths. So why is that so important that people retrain their brain and leaders retrain their, themselves and their organizations to focus on those strengths?
Well, first and foremost, we are handwriting twins. I don't know if anybody can see this. My handwriting is so terrible. Anytime that I'm facilitating or doing an actual workshop or training, I will not write things. I used to be a professor, and I would write stuff on the board. And I would always tell my students, if you cannot read what I've written on the board and you don't call me out on it within the first 30 seconds, there's a pretty good chance I won't be able to read it either. So I'm still struggling with that, right? And decades later. But that is the precursor to answering this question, Nicole. Let's think about it. We've been conditioned our whole life through the traditional approach to human development. And that traditional approach is simply this: our greatest opportunity for growth and development lies in our areas of weakness. The areas that we have the greatest areas of weakness, where we struggle the most, is where we have the greatest opportunities for growth. That has been conditioned into us in school. Sometimes we've seen it in extracurricular activities that we've participated in. Sometimes it's been parents. Sometimes it's been the organizational cultures that we've been a part of. But here's the thing. There's certain elements at your core, just like you with handwriting and just like me. I sucked at those when I was in kindergarten, first grade, second grade. I still am no good at that. It's still highly a weakened state. And we can go through our life trying to improve those levels, and we might get up to a level of almost mediocre, or marginal mediocrity. But the real question is simply this: what are we aiming for? Excellence or mediocrity? So that's the deficit approach. It takes us through this myth of well-roundedness. Hey, you got to be able to do everything. But when we can do everything, you can get pretty solid and pretty good, but you never actually can stand out and truly excel and be really excellent. When we take on a strengths-based approach, we're focusing on the areas of what's right. Now, here's the key with the strengths-based approach, Nicole, and I know you're very familiar with this. It's not a function of we pretend like we don't have weaknesses. Part of the strengths-based approach is owning exactly where we shine and where we're blind. We're confidently vulnerable, confident in those areas of our true strengths, and confident in being vulnerable, saying, that is not where I show up. These are my blind spots. In fact, as a result of that, I really need Nicole's perspective. I really need Stephen's perspective, whatever it is, because they're going to cover your blind spots. And that, from an organizational standpoint, when we transfer this up to teams, it allows us to have a common language in how we think, communicate, and interact through the filters of talent. So we can think of project teams not as just get the project done, the task done, which is what dominates a lot of culture, but we're able to see people through the lens in which they can best contribute through their strengths. And guess what? When people are playing to their strengths, guess what? They're energized, they're enthusiastic, they're engaged. That is the essence of what the strengths-based approach can do, is create cultures of employee engagement, as opposed to what's rampant now in many cultures in the United States. We've got a large chunk of our workforce that's highly disengaged. Over 65% of our workforce is disengaged in some capacity.
Yeah, it's crazy actually. When I started my business, Discover the Edge, 15 years ago, I did not think about what am I poor at and how am I going to build a business, work on those things and build a business around that. I didn't do that. I looked at it and
No.
said, okay, what am I great at? Actually, that's where I came across the Strengths Finder along with some other tools to understand myself, understand my strengths so that I could build a business, or like, we're talking about in the workplace, build a career around the things that I was great at, because I knew that that's where I would have the most interest, the most fun, that, I would also have the greatest ability to improve upon, and so forth. So I love this. There's so much talk right now about improving cultures. You talk about over 65% of, organizations that people are disengaged. Well, so, there's a lot of talk about we need to have humanity. We need to bring humanity into the organizations, right? We need to into the workplace. We need diversity. We need all these things. And I love your approach because I think it's like a foundational piece to all that addresses all of those things. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and that's what we believe. We believe at 34 Strong that everybody deserves a great place to work and that every workplace can be great. Now, it's not saying every workplace will be great, because becoming a great workplace is a choice. Now, here's the thing about culture and bringing together the pieces of the puzzle with humanity, Nicole, that's often overlooked. We talk about culture and we talk about hard skills and soft skills that people have. Soft skills are it's kind of a ridiculous term if we think about it. These are people skills, and this is what we need. People are the lifeblood of organizations. You're not going to get a healthy body with unhealthy blood flow through it. And if you think of the people as the lifeblood that flows through organizations, those are the exact same ways that we have to really focus on it. People are not just cogs. The strengths-based approach allows us to really dig a little bit deeper into figuring out what is it that makes people tick. What are the ways that they're approaching it? Right now, we're on completely different ends of the camera. You can see things behind me that I can't see. I can see things behind you that we can't see. When we take on a strengths-based approach to human development and we fold that into cultures, all of a sudden, we can start to see, Nicole, that we, even though we might be on different sides, different perspectives, we actually want the same outcome. So we can anchor on the outcome and we can reset around, okay, tell me what your strengths are seeing. Tell me what your strengths are seeing. That starts to bring people into each other. The big issues that we see within organizations, you can't do the kitchen sink approach. We'll do this today, we'll do strengths tomorrow, we'll do this. We've got to actually focus on the systemic understanding of what makes people tick. What are the ways that we can unpack that through the lens of engagement? So culture is huge. The final thing I'll leave you with on culture. Culture is created every single day. It's created one interaction, one email, one conversation, one phone call, one train. You name it. It's created one experience at a time. So leaders of organizations have a fundamental choice to make. Do you want to create culture intentionally by design, or do you want to create it by accident? Because either way, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. But if you're actually intentional about the design, it's going to take some serious work. It's not just something we do on Tuesdays in October once a month and give high fives and do a rah-rah. No, we have to dig deep to do the tourniquet technique, sometimes stop some of the bleeding that's there to get people rebuilding around trust, seeing through that different lens that's there.
Yeah. Well, and I love when we were talking at the coffee shop, you were talking about the fact that you work with companies for the long range. And another thing that really stood out for me was the fact that you being the consultant or your team that's coming in, you are not positioning yourself as the catalysts per se, that you're actually encouraging the people in the organization and saying this is going to be your responsibility. So talk about that. I think it's subtle, but yet there's a very important distinction here, especially for consultants and new consultants that might be listening and they want to go out and work with companies and they're trying to be the answer. And that's not going to create long-term change. So talk about that.
Absolutely. And let me start by jumping right on that. For your new consultants, people that are in the space that are living, I've been there. We've been there as a team. You get excited. I'm the consultant. I put on my Superman, Superwoman cape. We're going to solve this. We're going to fix this. Comes right back to the whole old adage, right? Of teach a person to fish. They fish for a lifetime. Give a person fish, they eat for a day. Our role and responsibility, the way that we see it as consultants, that we lead with in our conversations a lot of times when organizations are looking at this, we lead with simply this: we are not the change agents. We are the guides. That's all we are. If you're not going to take the ownership on making this reality in your company and you're not going to do the work, don't even bother bringing us on board. We will roll up our sleeves alongside of you, help you to see things, ask the questions. But the worst thing that can happen for us as consultants is where the teams further down the line, after it's gone from leadership into the next tier of staff, sees us as the change agents. Because as soon as we say, okay, we're done. Oh, well, my manager doesn't do any of this. That's 34 Strong, or that's this consulting agency that does that. We haven't actually impacted change at that point. And the real success, this is something that ties into leadership across the board, Nicole. And simply this: the true measure of a leader oftentimes is not what happens while they're there. It's what happens when they're not there, when they're gone, that legacy. So our goal right out of the gate is to connect with companies that are committed to creating and designing culture by design. We help architect that. We'll even help guide you through the building process, but it's yours. It's truly yours to take. So there's no just single prescription to the way that we do it. We have our tools and resources, but the way that we utilize it internally within different organizations, it's going to vary from organization to organization, and even within those organizations, from team to team, how we go about doing it based on the issues that they're facing.
Got it. So what's an example? I know people love stories. What's an example of a company where maybe there was some dysfunction in terms of people working together? Maybe I don't know. I'm just, thinking of some examples that we might be able to share of how this has transformed organizations, some fun stories of the impact that it's been able to make.
My audio is dipping a little bit, so I believe you asked the question of an example of a company or an organization that has gone through this. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thumbs up. Oh, perfect. Now it's coming through. Some of the examples that we've had, we've had stories where we've seen, and one of the things that we do in conjunction with strengths, because in our perspective, strengths is not the end all be all. It's a foundational piece, exactly what you were talking about. Let's just stop and see each other through the lens of talent. The long-term culture that we want to create is one of employee engagement, where people are actually engaged, showing up to work and feeling valued for being valuable through what it is that they uniquely contribute. Now, one of the areas that we've seen this with one of our companies that I won't name, but they're a large company out in the Midwest, in the candy business. And one of the things that they have seen is they measured engagement a few years ago when we started on certain teams. And employee engagement scores were just not quite where they wanted them to be. They have rolled up their sleeves, and we've done the same right alongside them, worked diligently with some of their leaders, with their frontline managers in some of our different systems, some of our different programs. We have different things that go into that. And year over year, they've been taking just some of the engagement measures and just attacking them one by one, really spending the time to understand what would shift. So I'll give you an example of this. Maybe, I know what's expected of me on the Q12 assessment that measures employee engagement. I know what's expected of me. That might sound, okay, well, that's real simple. I tell people what they want or what I want, what's needed, and it just happens. And it's kind of like playing a game of telephone as kids, right? Nicole, you remember that? You whisper something into somebody's ear, goes around 20 people, and it's a completely different phrase by the end. When you're a manager, you're a leader, you're talking to 20 different people, they all hear different things. So we actually have to come clear on understanding how we would set those expectations. And that ties into the core of trust. So I'm using that one as an example. But over time, what's happened is they've taken that, like that one indicator, maybe the score wasn't what was right, and they've spent time having one-to-ones with each employee over the course of that year and gradually transitioning. How do I set expectations uniquely for you? What do I naturally think? Because when we're setting expectations from the leadership chair or even from the manager's chair, we are setting those expectations based on if we're talking to who? Ourselves. Well, this is what I would do. How many times do we hear that? That's not exactly the way that it's going to register. So those are the areas that we've been able to go through. Long story short, over the track record of the past couple of years working with them, they have seen significant improvements in those engagement scores. And guess what that means? When there's more engaged employees, Nicole, there's a lot less turnover. There's a lot less shrinkage and theft that's going on. Productivity increases, profitability increases as well. And we've seen those elements with this particular client. And it has nothing to do with us making those changes. They're a beacon of excellence when it comes to the fact that they have owned it from the top all the way through to managers as they've gone. And that leadership team has really taken that and architected that message. We've been guiding from the shadows, but they've really been the ones that have taken it as it's rolled out, and we've just been helping them along the way.
I love it. And, personal responsibility, corporate leadership responsibility, really, really important. And this takes time. What I'm also hearing is this does take time. This isn't a one and done quick fix. Like you said, we do it in October once a month or whatever. These, and that's a challenge, because nowadays everybody wants things instant. They want to bring the speaker in. They want to, pump people up and so forth. But what you're talking about takes time. And it takes ownership on their side. So it's great. I love it. Now, grind, greatness, and genius. Mm-hmm. What is that about? I know you have an exercise, a free download for our listeners that they can download and do. So tell us about what those three are and what this exercise is about.
Okay, yeah. So grind, greatness, genius. A couple of things. It's a great starting point for people to identify what their natural areas of talent might be. We highly recommend that anybody go to Gallup. You go to gallupstrengthscenter.com and take the actual StrengthsFinder assessment to really dig into unpacking that. They've got a load of resources. You're very familiar with this as well. But through us, one of the exercises that we've gotten into, this is a great self-inventory, and it's actually a great management tool. Some of our leaders that we work with actually use this for their monthly one-to-one check-ins. So the whole point here is what we do is there, in the exercise that you'll see, it takes people through the whole cycle. You identify, hey, here's my work day, here's the things that I'm doing. What are the areas that are in my grind zone? So grind zone, Nicole, these are the things that you'd rather bang your head against a brick wall than actually do. You got to spend, 30 minutes doing this. You're going to spend 2 hours psyching yourself out because it's so miserable. Or you look at the clock and you're like, oh my gosh, I've only spent 20 minutes on this. It's just a grind. It's painful. The greatness, these are the areas for us, and we have these broken down into different columns and have different primers for how we think about this. Greatness, these are areas that you feel, I do that task pretty well. Maybe it's not a task. Maybe it's I build relationships really well, or I can just naturally go into a room pretty well and make connections, break the ice with people, or really think big picture and come up with ideas or absorb information. But I enjoy them. I'm pretty good at them. I feel strong when I do them. Now, the genius, that is like greatness on steroids, right? So it's like on a whole nother level. In genius, you're just naturally there. Very few can hold a candle to you in terms of what you're capable of doing with these areas. These things come so naturally and fluid to you. It's like water. It just pouring over the waterfall. It just adapts and it flows in that state. You don't even think about it. The fascinating part when you're going through this exercise, whether it's for self or in others, if you're using it as a coaching tool to have a conversation starter with people, a lot of times what we do really well, Nicole, we don't even think of. The things that you're going through, you're saying, oh, that's no big deal. Anybody, you could teach a monkey how to do that. That's so ridiculous. It's not a big deal. A lot of times what you find, That is exactly why people come to you. That's what people value about you. So the things that you undervalue are oftentimes elements of what people value in you. And conversely, things that you really value in somebody else, they might not even see it, because in their mind, anybody can do this, because who's their lens oriented to? Through their filter. This is the power of strengths in being able to see that. Grind, Greatness, Genius is a great way to start exploring that without even going into the full StrengthsFinder process. It's not anything nearly as robust. And if you have it in conjunction with your StrengthsFinder results, you can go a lot deeper. Great coaching tool. We've seen, again, a lot of our managers working through that tool on their monthly check-ins. They'll set somebody up with the Grind, Greatness, Genius exercise, and then they'll just actually evaluate how much time do you feel like you're spending in your grind zone, greatness, or genius, with the goal of spending less time in the grind zone, more time in the greatness and genius zone. The final piece I'll make on that exercise for anybody that is going to use that from a leadership management standpoint, just know this: you're never going to eliminate the grind zone. There's always going to be elements of grind. But if you're spending 80 or 90% of your grind, let's start moving that downwards. Let's start moving that, seeing if we can move it to below 50%. And the productivity, your own engagement, how connected you feel will start to rise as well.
So do you find that in using this tool and even just teaching the strengths in organizations that that people's the role descriptions, job descriptions need to change because somebody is, in a role, they're really good. Like sometimes if you look at job descriptions, a lot of times they just lump a whole bunch of things on there, and they're actually requiring somebody to have a whole bunch of different skill sets that don't actually match up, if that makes sense. So do you find that you end up having to restructure those roles so that you can, like, let's say, for example, if somebody needs to they're responsible, it's like salespeople. They're responsible for the paperwork. They hate the paperwork, right? They hate doing all that stuff. So, that may be their grind, for example. But the company, for example, are mandated that this is what they have to do. And yet that's actually taking them away from making more money for the company. So what do you do with that? So to be able to eliminate and minimize those areas of grind.
Yeah, this has actually, the answer to that question is yes, sometimes roles shift. So what happens is, because of this, we're able to start seeing these little micro nuggets. Maybe there's 4 people that are on a team and they're all set to do the exact same role. But there's different elements in that all contribute to a unified outcome from a project basis or from a focus basis. So what we have seen is teams start to say, okay, well, here's where I do better. I really do good on the front end of these projects with going out, gathering the information, the resources, the research, and going through and collecting that. And that person, instead of having to do that, the execution of like getting all of the paperwork done right away, and then maybe even going through and connecting to all the people elements, they're able to help really queue up the information that's needed for that. Other team members maybe come in for a project, they're able to execute on the paperwork, getting that process done. And maybe somebody else is really good at going out and advocating, building the advocacy that can be needed sometimes for an initiative to go in the organization, but they're not as good at doing the front end build out of the research and information. So we have seen teams organizations take this and then just start actually making little micro shifts within roles. So you're actually moving towards the results that you've been clamoring for, but people are able to contribute in a way that they uniquely contribute. Again, remember, Nicole, people want to be valued for being valuable. That's what it is. Nobody shows up and that wants to do a terrible job at work on their first day at a new job. That comes and that can be bred over time from constantly being set up for where they feel like I could never be successful.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I hear in this is that it's the willingness to make the adjustments to get the results, because it's the results. It's not the how necessarily, like it has to be this way because it's the way it's always been done, but it is if we're going to get the results, and that's what we're really focused on, how do we do that in the most effective way? So good stuff. Now, before we wrap up, I would love for our listeners to get to know you a little bit. I know you are so passionate about this. So maybe tell us how you became so passionate about this, where you discovered this for yourself, maybe some of the challenges that you faced in dealing with strengths versus weaknesses or whatever, and what led you to here, and so people can get a chance to get to know Darren a little bit more personally.
Okay. Yeah. So my quick, I'll give you the quick version of this cycle here. I had the privilege of working on highly disengaged teams under really, really dysfunctional leadership. And I had the privilege of working on highly engaged teams with highly functional leadership that really played in. And I use the word privilege not lightly. I use it because I feel like both of those experiences, even though they were a complete dichotomy, were profound in where I've gotten to. Because as I went through the cycle of living in both of those spaces, I was given a gift when my daughter was 4.5 months old. My wife, my daughter, and I took our first trip together as a family. We went to the Big Island of Hawaii. And every morning, I would take my daughter out to the sea. She'd wake up early on Hawaiian time. We're here in California. Let's tell my wife, go ahead and sleep in. She was still breastfeeding her at the time. I'd take her down, and it was just amazing watching her take in the world, Nicole, and just seeing what it had to offer. Now, one of those mornings, she was sitting on my lap, and she laughed out loud for the first time. And that was one of the most amazing and terrifying moments of my life. It was truly amazing because I'm sitting there staring into her little eyes and her little soul at the time, this little body that had just figured out something new. And I saw, wow, you're pure potential. But mirrored back at me, I was reminded, hey, you're pure potential, or you were pure potential. What happened? What happened? And what kind of life are you willing to live for this little girl and for others? You have other pieces that you can get involved in, and you have more to give. You've lived in really dysfunctional work environments, and I was in one at the time, and something changed in me, Nicole. And I had taken the Strengths Finder not long before that trip. And it's amazing when you change the way that you're looking at things, the things that you're looking at actually start to change. Within 2 months of that trip, I met my business partner, Brandon Miller, and I had made changes to just say, I've got to pull off of the safety of, a nice salary and all these certain sorts of things. And I had started the transition process, and it was because of that gift. I wasn't willing to live my life for my children, for the next generations to come, to make that impact. I saw it in her. The final piece I'll say, I saw in her the opportunity to work with workplaces and with cultures to make those little micro shifts. Because guess what? We spend at least a third of our life at work. If people are going to work and they're feeling energized and fulfilled, they're going to be better parents. They're going to be better spouses. They're going to be better partners, better brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, community members. So I look at the work that we're doing not as a short-term sort of component. It's creating those minor cultural shifts that become major cultural and lifestyle shifts for over time. And I'm super thankful to my daughter, who today actually started the 2nd grade when we're doing this interview. That's where I was coming from here to do that. So it's that whole process.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I didn't know that. And that's really powerful. And, what you're talking about is that processional effect, the ripple effect that goes out. And it's so very powerful. And so thank you for sharing a little bit about what you have been doing, what you guys are, you've got an incredible team there, what you all have been doing. And we'll make sure that a link to the exercise, the Grind Greatness Genius exercise, is in the show notes. We'll also make sure, of course, that that people can access your website, 34strong.com, and all the social media links will be there as well. Final thoughts for where we left off. You talk about parents and the next generation. Final thoughts for parents listening and using this and helping their kids to play to their strengths. in the midst of being in a school system that teaches otherwise, perhaps.
So again, something cut on the audio here, but if I'm hearing you correctly, it's any final thoughts around the lens of for parents or people that are working for the lens of parents. Okay, perfect. So yeah, there are some thoughts here. And what comes to mind here, Nicole, and for everybody that's listening, is just the reminder that the cliche, the journey is the destination. So the more that we can invest in strengthening our children, our relations with them, identifying what makes them tick, the more that we can build that bond and create those opportunities for them. And, you know, there's going to be areas where they don't thrive as much, but getting into a place, I heard somebody say recently, even in the lens of strengths and weaknesses, there's that dichotomy. So it's not the lens, again, that we don't have weaknesses. Celebrate failures. Celebrate failures because they make us who we are. One of our practices as a household that we've gotten into, every week, my wife, myself, my now 7-year-old, and even my 3-year-old, we just ask a simple question. What's a mistake you made this week? You're not going to get in trouble if you did something, if you locked your brother in a closet and you shouldn't have done that, you know. But we just have gotten comfortable with the practice of acknowledging who we are and who we aren't. This sounds like the complete opposite answer of playing to our strengths, but it allows us to own our mistakes and ask, what can we learn from it? And then we also ask daily, what are the things you did today that made you feel strong? Anything that you did that made you feel strong. And this is some of the wisdom that we can seek, not only in our children, but even in our coworkers. What are the things that lit your candle today? And if we have more of those conversations, slight shifts in the conversations that we're having, the questions that we're asking, that will bring us more into each other and seeing each other through their lens, the way that they want to be treated, the way that they show up strong, whether it's our kids or our coworkers.
Love it. Darren, thank you so very much. Appreciate you being here today. And we thank you to our listeners and our viewers for being here as well. You know, I love having conversations with amazing people that are doing great things in the world, but I love sharing it so that you can be inspired to be the difference maker and the world changer that you're capable of being. And so I always say leaders of transformation take action. So something here today that Darren has said, take action on it, whether it's asking yourself and your kids different questions at home, whether it's taking that Strengths Finder assessment that you can find online from Gallup, and or doing the free exercise, and we'll make sure that link again is in the show notes so that you can access that on your grind, your greatness, and your genius, so you can start dialing in and spending more of your time on the things that you're a genius at. And so we encourage you to take action. Love to hear your stories. You can go on leaderstransformation.com and share with us there. You can find us on social media. Again, we'd love to hear your stories and even what you're planning to do. If you have ideas as to how you want to make an impact, maybe this has inspired you and said, wow, you know what, I could probably incorporate this into my own, culture at work. Or maybe you have another idea of something that's really important that stood out. Sometimes, hanging around with people that are inspired and that are passionate and that are living life powerfully has a tendency to inspire us. Even if it's in a completely different area, it inspires us. So notice those things and take action on those things, because I do believe that every single person is capable of being a leader of transformation. So we look forward to hearing those stories, and we appreciate you being here. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.